The end of 2023 witnessed an unprecedented debate in Japan over LGBTQ rights in the national diet. What is the current state of the fight for ensuring greater protection of LGBTQ rights in Japan, and what was behind this push for legislation? The United States has seen significant successes in LGBTQ rights over the past decades, but continues to confront challenges. How could the US's experiences help inform the LGBTQ struggle in Japan? Are there lessons that the LGBTQ communities in both countries could learn from each other?
The general employee community.
We warmly welcomed
interested.
everyone with an
And I think the
interest in
general public in
LGBTQ rights as well as broader social change in Japan and the US. There was time to engage in a discussion with the speakers during the program and the following networking session, and it was supported by Embassy of Japan and NIJIS, which is National Association of Japan American Societies.
I'm Margaret Taylor. I lead public affairs here at Salesforce. I have the honor of welcoming you to our global headquarters right here in downtown San Francisco. And so for those online, we wish you could see our beautiful view. Before we get started, I did want to give a special thank you to my colleagues from Outforce and from Asia Pac Force, who have been unbelievable in helping us get the word out to some of our colleagues in other locations, not only here in SF. You may not know this about Salesforce, but we have several core values, 5 of them to be exact, and one of them is equality, and it feels very important to mention that today. So if you see any of those posters around the office while you're here with us, you probably will see that point out. But you're not here for me, you're here for the rest of the group. So I'm delighted to introduce you to Larry Greenwood, who's the chair of the board. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Margaret. And looking around, do we have Amy? Oh, there's Amy. I was going to say, we can't start the program without the moderator. I'm Larry Greenwood, the chair of the board of the Japan Society of Northern California. And thank you all very much for coming. Thanks to Margaret and Salesforce for hosting this event in this wonderful facility. Of the edge of the video, right? Because this is, yeah, okay, right. And thanks also to the Embassy of Japan in Washington, D.C., which provided the funding for this program, and also to the National Association of Japan American Societies, which helped arrange that funding. And want to have special welcome to Andy Wegalalia, who you'll be hearing from later. You know, the Japan Society, we do about a program a week. So we're very active, and we do it in lots of different areas. We do them in business, innovation, technology, economics, politics, foreign policy, social issues, such as this one, culture and the arts. So when I read last fall about legislation in the Japanese legislative body called the Diet, that was aimed at promoting and protecting LGBTQ plus rights, I was very interested because I thought it would be a perfect opportunity to have a dialogue between folks from Japan who have been working in that area, and of course, folks here, since San Francisco, after all, is the global epicenter of the LGBTQ rights movement. So I was really grateful that we had this opportunity to be able to actually do the program. And in explaining kind of why it makes sense for people from San Francisco and Japan to talk about LGBTQ plus rights, I actually want to borrow the words of someone I just met recently, Imani Rupert Gordon. And we were explaining to her the program, and she said, you know, how important it was to have these kinds of cross-border interactions, that no country, no city, no region is a vacuum for these kinds of things. And when it comes to social justice, we're all in this together. And what happens in one country affects and influences the other, sometimes for good and sometimes, unfortunately, for bad. And that is really important, that we learn for each other, that we listen, that we learn, and that we work together to achieve progress. That progress in one country is progress shared for everyone. And so that I really appreciated those words, Imani. So without further ado, let me start the program. We have, to start the program, messages from two political leaders here in California. The first is Representative Mark Takano, who is a member of Congress from Southern California. And so let's start with his message to us. And I want to say that that actually Mark wanted very much to be here in person today, and was actually, when he first heard about it, was very excited and planned to come. Unfortunately, his schedule got very complicated, so he wasn't able to come, but he was gracious enough to make that recording for us, which I thought was fantastic. The second speaker that we have on video is Scott Wiener, and from right here in San Francisco. I think everyone here probably in this room knows Scott very well. He's a state senator in Sacramento, but representing San Francisco. Let's cue up. And thanks to Scott Wiener and his staff for that. Okay, let's start the program. So it's my great pleasure to introduce our moderator for today's program, Amy Sueyoshi. Amy is a historian, a professor at San Francisco State University, and she's also the provost. A very desired position, apparently, except she tells me it's not. But it's a very important position, obviously, one that helps run the university. And so we're very happy. Amy's done great work as a historian, looking at LGBTQ rights in the past and issues including, I don't know if it's in particular, but including the Japanese American community. And she was telling me a number of work about the work that she's been doing in that area, which is really fascinating, the historical work. But without further ado, please welcome Amy Sueyoshi. If I could ask the other speakers, one of the other speakers, please come here, and then we'll put Amy here at the end, and we'll just have the other speakers lined up here. Yeah, well, they do. And I will give you this one.
Hi, everyone. I just want to thank all of you for being here today. Thanks also to the Japan Society for inviting me to be a part of this conversation. I'm so grateful to be able to have Akira here to talk about what's going on in Japan and to be in conversation with folks in the US as well. So without any further ado, I just want to go over the program very briefly and then do an introduction, and then we can begin. So each of the speakers will speak for about 7 to 8 minutes, and then we'll have about 30 minutes of moderated discussion of a set of questions that I'll be asking. And then hopefully, all of you will start asking questions. And so we can follow up with a Q&A for about 20 minutes. So you have all the bios on the web, but I'm just going to give you a brief bio for each of them. And if you want to read more about them, then you're welcome to obviously go online. So Akira Nishiyama is Deputy Secretary General of JAL, Japan Alliance for LGBT Legislation. Akira is a human rights defender of LGBTQ+ people. She has been working for several NPOs to support the LGBTQ+ community in Japan, and is currently in charge of global advocacy and overall administration at JAL, an organization with over 100 LGBTQ+ CSOs, whose mission is to urge Japanese government to legislate laws to remove social barriers based on sexual orientation and gender identity. We also have Aaron Belkin with us. He's a chair of the political science department at San Francisco State University. He's a scholar, author, and social justice advocate who has written and edited more than 25 scholarly articles, chapters, and books. From 1999 until 2022, Belkin served as founding director of the Palm Center, where he designed and implemented much of the public education campaign that eroded popular support for military, anti-gay, and anti-transgender discrimination. I met Aaron at school at my campus, San Francisco State University, and I call him the guy that got the Pentagon to decide that Don't Ask, Don't Tell needed to be thrown in the garbage. So it's pretty incredible feat. So thank you for being here. Next up, we have Larry Bates, former corporate director, executive officer, general counsel, and business advocate. Larry has been engaged in cross-border business investment and rule of law issues in China and Japan throughout his career, first with international law firms based in New York, Beijing, and Tokyo, and then for 22 years at General Electric Company as general counsel in multiple Asia-based business divisions. While in Tokyo, he also served in 2013 as president of the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan. So let's give a warm welcome to our three speakers. And Akira, I think you're up first. Yes.
Okay, I thought I was second. But so my name is Akira from JR, and thank you for Japan Society and also Embassy of Japan and the Salesforce and the Najas for organizing this such a nice event and also inviting me from Tokyo. And I'm so glad to be here in San Francisco and to talk about LGBTQ issues in Japan. So first, I am using the slide. So next, please. Okay, so firstly, I'd like to talk a little bit about the difficulties that Japanese LGBTQ people face in Japan, and also I am going to talk more about what happened last year around the G7 Hiroshima summit that happened in May. Yeah, in May last year. So firstly, so since even though like Japanese society is changing, but still LGBTQ people are facing so many difficulties. For instance, as you can see, over half of LGBTQ teenagers have been bullied, and also the rate of suicidal thoughts for LGBTQ people are very higher, like 6 to 10 times higher compared to cisgender heterosexual people in Japan. And also only 10% of LGBTQ people are able to come out at their workplace. And the next slide. But on the other hand, we can see also that society change too. For instance, same-sex partnership system now have been introduced in over 350 municipalities as of 1st of November last year. And there are several studies shows that around 65 to 17% of Japanese population now support same-sex marriage. And also almost 88% are supporting the legislation prohibiting bullying and discrimination against the sexual minorities. And also 78% supports and agrees that legal gender recognition law without gender affirmation surgery. I can explain more details later. And then next slide. But so even though we can see the changes, but still we are not protected by law that much yet. So that's why the JO, our organization, was established 9 years ago to legislate especially anti-discrimination law on the grounds of sexual orientation and the gender identity. And also now we are focusing on to urge Japanese government to amend the legal gender recognition law too. Next slide. So as Amy said, like JO is a network organization with 100 LGBTQ CSOs across Japan. And we propose the policy recommendations also, and we provide consultations to companies or local governments and also school at the university and so on. And also we conduct research, and also we distribute the questionnaires to the candidates whenever there is an election, so that the constituencies can see which candidate and also which political parties are supporting LGBTQ rights. Next slide. So from here, I'd like to explain about what happened last year, before and after G7 Hiroshima summit. Next slide. And so like we have been working with the organizations in Japan and also working with the international human rights organizations too, like internationally. And it started at the 2020 when there was a Tokyo Olympic Paralympic. So we have been trying to use this momentum to push more for the legislation of anti-discrimination law. And then as a part of a global campaign, it's called Equality Act Japan, like we also have asked many companies to support for the legislation of anti-discrimination law. And then now over 90 companies have been supporting, and including Salesforce. And Salesforce, thank you. And next slide. And after 3 years, since 2020, like because we knew that there would be a G7 Hiroshima summit, and then among G7 countries, Japan is the only country which does not have a law to protect people from a SOGI-based violence. For instance, we don't have marriage equality yet, and we don't have anti-discrimination law, and also we have legal gender recognition law, which has inhuman requirements, and I will talk later. So, and we wanted, I mean, civil society organizations wanted to use this momentum. So, and then we started this initiative called Pride 7. So for the G7, there are official engagement group in the civil society. For instance, there's a Women 7 that promotes gender equality, and also there is a Business 7, Labor 7, so on. But there was no LGBTQ focused engagement group. So like Japanese LGBTQ community started this initiative. Next slide. So like, we invited the business leaders and also labor unions and embassies from G7 countries and the EU and those other CSOs to the to hold a symposium to promote the LGBTQ rights, the photo on the left and also right at the top. And also we went to Hiroshima and to hold some several press conferences too. Next slide. So, and then after G7, Japanese government have enacted a law, and there's no, I don't think they have an official English translation yet. But so this is kind of, there's a law on promoting public understanding of the diversity in sexual orientation and the gender identity. So here, from here, I just call it SOGI understanding law. Next slide. So it is a good, the first step for Japan to have a law, but it's not the anti-discrimination law, even though on the guiding principle, it says that the unfair discrimination on the basis of SOGI is inexcusable, like it should not be tolerated. And this law is, so the purpose of this law is to promote people's understanding on the diversity of SOGI. So like, you know, because they saw that maybe not many Japanese people know about the LGBTQ people and the diversity of SOGI. So that's why the purpose of this law is to promote the understanding. And according to this law, the government has to do 4 things. First, they have to publish a white paper on the status of implementation of measures, and also they formulate basic implementation plan, and also they need to conduct academic research, and also they need to establish the liaison council of officials from the cabinet office and also each ministries. Next slide. I think I over 7 minutes there. And then so, and in addition to the SOGI understanding law, there was a huge victory for LGBTQ community in Japan. So the last October, the Supreme Court ruled that one of the requirements for legal gender recognition law is against the Constitution. And that requirement is the compulsory sterilization. So, and then because the Supreme Court ruled that that is against the Constitution, now it's the time for legislative body to start discussion on how to amend legal gender recognition law. And yeah, so this is the end of my remark, and I can explain more later, but thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Akira. Aaron, you're up next.
Thank you so much. It's such an honor to be on stage and to know a little bit about your incredible work, and looking forward to hearing your story, and want to thank all of you for coming today, and also, of course, our hosts, the Japan Society and Salesforce. So I was honored to spend 24 years fighting the US military, and the work helped contribute to 3 policy victories, all of which might be reversed depending on the outcome of elections. But for now, very proud to have helped lift the ban against gays, lesbians, and bisexuals in the military, and then lift the ban against transgender troops in the military, and finally, recently, lifting the ban against intersex people serving in the military. And I'll just say a few words. Oh, I'll say a few words about the architecture of the strategy in a minute, but I want to start by flagging that, advocates had different reasons for working on the policies. And Amy, you were very generous in the way you credited me, but in fact, in all those campaigns, there were multiple groups pursuing multiple strategies. In fact, one of the most famous advocates in the country, Zoe Dunning, is here today. Advocates were working on a range of strategies, often because they really wanted to help the troops. And my sense why I was working on these policies really didn't have to do with the troops. I was worried about the effect that discrimination would have on the troops. Of course, the policies led to sexual violence, non-sexual violence, depression, loss of careers, terrible, terrible, terrible things, and would never minimize that. But what really drove me every day was my sense that the bans themselves were put in place on the basis of fascist tactics. What is fascism? Fascism is us-them politics. It's dividing in-groups from out-groups on the basis of lies and then using state power to punish out-groups. And I was concerned that if we give fascism a free pass, then it could amplify to other policies and laws. And I thought that the instantiation of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, of the transgender ban, of all of these policies they were put in place on the basis of garden variety fascist approaches. So what was the architecture of the strategy? I'll just talk about the policy banning gays, lesbians, and bisexuals. The policy was called Don't Ask, Don't Tell, but we really used the same architecture with the other policies as well. So the other groups were working on a range of tactics, litigation, grassroots advocacy, lobbying, all kinds of different things. At the Palm Center, we were concerned with storytelling. That's really all we did was storytelling. What's up with that? And why did that matter? And why did that work? And I'm super curious to hear if there are differences and similarities and whether the strategy would work in Japan. So Don't Ask, Don't Tell, you can think of it as this basket of horribles. And the reason for Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the underlying reason was dislike of gay and lesbian people. You can call it homophobia, you can call it intolerance, you can call it prejudice, you can call it whatever you want. But it was just hatred, pure and simple, basis of fascism. But the folks who put Don't Ask, Don't Tell in place did not feel comfortable being honest about their reasons. They didn't want to go to Congress and say, we need to ban gays, lesbians, and bisexuals because we hate them. They didn't want to admit to their homophobia. So they made up a phony rationale that sounded really good. It sounded sanitary. It sounded American. It sounded patriotic. It was called the unit cohesion idea. And it was the notion that we love gays and lesbians, but when gays and lesbians and bisexual people serve openly in the military, that undermines unit cohesion, the bonds of trust. And our service members, our straight service members, will not trust their peers if they're afraid that they're serving next to gays and lesbians. And we, the military, our job is to fight and win wars. We need unit cohesion to defend the United States. And if we allow gays, lesbians, and bisexuals to serve, unit cohesion is going to suffer, military readiness is going to suffer, national security is going to suffer. Now, when I came onto the scene 24 years ago, our community was using a fairness argument and a democracy argument to fight Don't Ask, Don't Tell. We need gays, lesbians, and bisexuals in the military because discrimination is unfair. At the Palm Center, we thought that it was important to reframe the conversation in terms of the exact frame that the advocates of discrimination were using to justify policy. Because we didn't think, as long as the generals and admirals could say with a straight face that gays, lesbians, and bisexuals hurt the military, we didn't think it would ever be safe for a politician to lift the ban. And so what we wanted to do was we wanted to change the national story in the very terms that defenders of discrimination were using to sustain discrimination. You want to talk about unit cohesion? Fine. We are going to show that gays, lesbians, and bisexuals promote unit cohesion and that discrimination harms unit cohesion. Now, we're in a moment now, fast forwarding 24 years, when we've been told facts don't matter, fake news, the media doesn't matter. My argument is then and now, facts do matter, but you have to make them matter. We knew that we were right on the merits 24 years ago when we started. The military already had research showing that gays, lesbians, and bisexuals don't harm unit cohesion. They had suppressed that research, of course, but they had the research. We knew that we were right. We knew, however, that we needed to persuade the court of public opinion. We needed to persuade Main Street, reporters, editors, judges, professors, military leaders. We needed to create a virtuous narrative cycle that actually it's discrimination that's harming the military, not gays and lesbians. And if we could do that, then it would be safe for advocacy strategies that Zoe and other folks were pursuing, litigation, lobbying, grassroots, to push policy reform across the line. It was almost like volleyball. We were trying to set the ball so that Zoe and her colleagues could come and spike it by changing the law. So how did we make facts matter? We used an advertising strategy, a repetition strategy, and we decided 3 or 4 times a year. And so we did this about 35 times over 10 years, and it worked every single time. We wanted to make national news. That means not the San Francisco Chronicle, but that means CBS, AP, NPR, Fox, CNN, national news about a new piece of research or a new data set or a new piece of data showing that it's discrimination that hurts the military, not gays and lesbians. And we wanted national headlines making that point again and again and again and again, so that looking forward to the end game, yeah, maybe our opponents would use the unit cohesion idea to fight policy reform, but no one would take them seriously. And so what did those 35 campaigns look like? New study. Gays and lesbians in the British military is a success. We did a study on the British military. We found an openly gay British submariner. We gave the study and the submariner to the New York Times. They ran a front page article. New study, military is firing linguists, Arabic linguists, for being gay. This was at a time when the military had a shortage of Arabic linguists. Now, I'm an anti-militarist. I don't want to promote war, but the military did need Arabic linguists. The message of the British study and the Arabic linguist story and study was exactly the same. It's discrimination that hurts the military. We're losing Arabic linguists. And gays and lesbians don't hurt the military. Look at the British military. So we did that about 35 times over 10 years. And that opened up a space by which the national conversation was reframed around the national security argument. We no longer made the fairness argument, and the policy was changed. So there's more to be said. We could talk about the repeal of the transgender ban, other aspects of the strategy, but that is the kind of nuts and bolts of how it worked.
Thank you, Aaron. 7 minutes on the button. You're excellent. You 7 minutes on the button. You're excellent. Yeah, you're great job. Yeah. I'm thinking also we need your strategy to recoup the discourse around higher ed as well. So yeah, thank you. Larry, you're up.
Thank you. Thank you. Green, okay. Thank you to Salesforce for hosting, and to Japan Society of Northern California for sponsoring. And it's also a great honor to be here with such strong advocates for LGBTQ plus rights in both Japan and the United States. I'm very honored. I should say, maybe answer the question, what am I doing here in the first place? I live in Connecticut. I don't currently live in either Japan or California. But actually, my connection to San Francisco is that my husband and I got married here in 2008 during that window when it was possible on the steps of the City Hall. It happened to be Halloween, so my husband and I will eternally have a great fondness in our hearts for San Francisco. And of course, as was clear, I guess, from my bio, I've lived most of my career in Asia, about 38 years, 30 of those years in Japan. And as you know, and if you just heard, the world has changed around us, not just in Japan, but in the United States on these issues greatly during those decades. And so we kind of lived those as an American and a Chinese, my husband is from China, in Japan during those decades and have a few personal observations with a couple of advocacy points I'd like to make as well. I should say, even though Congressman Takano, I think, was appropriately very strong in his words about the lack of appropriate legislation still in Japan, and Akira has made those points as well, that Japan has been very good to my husband and me in our development. We wouldn't have stayed there for 30 years if that were not otherwise the case. Starting out when we moved from China, though, we could not even come to the United States. So keeping in mind again how much the world has changed, there was no marriage law or civil union law here, and as Chinese in those days, right after Tiananmen, could not easily get a visa to come here. Japan was welcoming to both of us, and both of us had some background in Japan as well. But from the start, we had to deal with the panoply of issues that come into place when you do not have legal protections and legal rights. And those started for us, of course, with immigration. On what basis could we stay there as a couple for the longer term? How did that affect then in turn my own career with GE, where I did work for 22 years, and the expectation that you were not always supposed to be a permanent expat, you were supposed to move around to accelerate your career, but that was not easily possible for these immigration issues. There were economic aspects, which personally I was very lucky to have the resources to be able to mostly figure out and deal with, but a lot of people in our situations don't have those economic resources. Things like what it took my husband to get his visa by being a student and getting, like, in the end, I think 5 different degrees in 3 countries, or when he set up his business, which was really not just for his self-esteem and to make a little bit of a living, but really to have a independent right to be able to live in Japan. And then, of course, there are issues like healthcare costs and the premiums that go with that if you don't have the benefit of marriage. And a lot of younger people don't understand this when I talk to them about it, but until they get coupled and then they start thinking about having children, as we did later in life when we were in our early 50s, there are tax issues, there are schooling issues, there are a whole variety of issues that people, as I think they age together as couples, as many people I'm sure in this room know, you have to start to think about. And so all of these issues led me relatively later in my career, as I became more comfortable in the coming out process myself, because this was over decades, led me to want to get involved in some ways that I could help, that I could use the benefits that I had in my career and the things I had learned to do what I could, especially from a corporate perspective. And the first area that I got pretty deeply involved in was marriage equality issues, which you've heard a little bit about already today. And I was sitting down with a number of fellow gay lawyers one day, and we were talking about how there's really no business voice out there for promoting this type of issue, which is fundamentally a discrimination issue if you can't have the right to be married and coupled. And so we decided to pursue a public white paper, which we then synthesized into a viewpoint, which was sponsored by the American Chamber of Commerce in Japan, where I had connections from my days as president, and by the LGBT Lawyers and Allies Network, where we had a tremendous grouping of lawyers, both gay and allied, both Japanese and foreign, who deeply, deeply cared about this issue because of personal experiences they had in many cases in their law firms or whatever, where they knew gay people who were struggling on their workforces. So we got this viewpoint out ultimately, and there'll be links to it here, hopefully, that you can all access. But it almost overlaps with the slide that Akira showed. Today, we have over 100 and some corporate endorsers of the viewpoint. And many of these are Japanese companies, including the two Japanese companies, Lixil and Panasonic, that I work for. And the arguments, of course, from the companies' perspectives, which are laid out in this viewpoint, are pretty basic. But I think the first and foremost important one is not just that Japan is an outlier or that it's a matter of fundamental fairness, but there's a business interest in making sure that your workers are happy and can be productive. And there's many more people in the workforce than we realize, especially as Akira has pointed out, in an environment where only 10% of those who might identify as sexual minorities actually openly do come out. And we actually confirmed this within Panasonic with the first ever survey that we had done. And we saw that, you know, there were far more people who were even willing, we were surprised to fill out a survey, which was, we did our best to keep anonymous, than were members of the affinity group or were applying for the benefits that Panasonic offered as one of the first Japanese companies to give, you know, gay benefits. And so nobody was applying for these things. So I got involved then, and this is the second point I'd like to make about advocacy, in DEI activities within my company, and spoke at programs, being as part of top leadership and being gay. It was something that I think, you know, people in the company had not seen, and we still have so far to go. But I remember that we would do video conferences and so forth. This was mostly during COVID, where we would have to like give anonymous or give people the right to access the conference without being able to trace where it was coming from, or be within the company, give people safe spaces, get other allies within the company, including our HR director, the head of one of our businesses, to come and participate in these panels because they recognized that these would be the benefits if we could get people to be more comfortable, to be who they are and contribute as they should be doing to the company. So maybe I stop there with those things. And I think this coming out point is one that we can come back to later as to the reasons Japan may not be making more progress on that. I'd love to hear others' thoughts about that as well. Thank you, Amy.
Thank you, Larry. So I have a few questions here. We'll see how quickly we get through them. And, you know, I don't have to ask all of them. Obviously, I'm much more interested in hearing what kind of questions you folks have. But the first question is, where did advocacy succeed and where did it fail? Are there lessons to be learned in the struggle for LGBTQ plus rights that the US and Japan could learn from each other? No, I mean, anyone is free to speak. Akira, do you want to try to go first? They've had these questions in advance, folks, so I know they're looking very contemplative, but I just want to be real.
Okay, maybe I can go first. Okay, so I think, and also I mean, Japanese LGBTQ community think that the advocacy that happened last year, I think, was to some extent successful because now we have a law to promote people's understanding, right? And then the reason why I consider this as successful is that even though it's not, it's still, there's much space for, how can I say, the reason why I said it's successful is that not only the Japanese LGBTQ community, but also all the actors, including business sector, labor union, feminist organizations, and other CSRs, like everyone stood up for to speak up and to speak up to promote for the LGBTQ people's rights, and then also how do you say? And actually, even before, like a few years before, the business federation and the business sectors have already kind of announced that they will support the legislation of marriage equality and also anti-discrimination law, and also more companies are supporting both legislation, right? And then in response to those works by business sector and the labor union and so on. Now, like the last year, everyone stood up, and then that because of that, now we have a law. So So I think we can say that that was also one of the successful advocacy and the change in Japan. I don't know if it makes sense or not, but yeah.
Well, I think that point about everybody speaking up is critically important, and it goes to the point about how we could have so many more people speaking up if people were more comfortable coming out in their workspaces, to their families, to their friends. I mean, Japan has changed hugely over the last 30 or 40 years that I've been there, and the social attitudes enabled what I think you were able to accomplish last year, those changes, but there's so much more that needs to be done. And I think one of the lessons I learned watching the US from a distance was, and Aaron, your point about storytelling is so important. When people know somebody who's gay and the person's come out to their families, we saw in the US that meant exponential growth in the number of people who would support change, right? And understanding. And that's where we're still coming from behind a little bit in Japan, and it's always a bit of a mystery to me and a challenge. I have ideas about it, but how do we get more people to feel comfortable coming out? I think that will help the advocacy efforts tremendously.
You did give us the questions in advance, but without deep expertise on Japanese culture, I would be really, really hesitant to offer any insight or advice, because I think the deployment of the strategies can be context specific, but in some cases not, and I just don't know.
How about Aaron, the fact that you use storytelling, was that surprising to you that that would be a successful mode of culture change when you first began your work?
I always thought that the work would work, because it wasn't predictable kind of when, but everyone in the community knew that the other side was lying. And at least in that moment, there was still some shame about lying in public. And I mean, gays, lesbians, and bisexuals just don't undermine the military. And so we thought that if we told that story again and again and again in the national media, that would create the virtuous cycle. I will say one thing about framing that I think is pretty interesting, that there was a really famous book, Don't Think of an Elephant, and it was by George Lakoff more than 20 years ago, and it was telling progressives to be slick about framing like conservatives. There was a bill that the Bush administration had sponsored to make the air dirtier. It was a handout to coal, oil, and gas, and they called it the Clear Skies Initiative. And the point in the book was like, you got to be slick like that about framing, because once you win the framing argument, then you win. And we at the Palm Center thought that was absolutely wrong, and that the problem was not to be slick about framing, it was to tell the truth about the evidence, but to do it repeatedly, in the same way that if you saw one commercial for a product in your life, it would never influence your consumer behavior, but on repeated exposure, you might have a chance of breaking through.
Great. I wanted to ask a question about sort of backlash. So even in the US, I think that young people today feel like this is the worst time ever to be queer in America. It's an interesting thing to think, right? Particularly with all the trans bans and just a lot of local legislation that's even happening in the state of California in public schools, no less. And so, Akira, also, I don't know if you could talk a little bit about backlash in Japan. I spoke to a immigration attorney who works on refugee cases from Japan to the US. And she was saying that right now it's actually looking like Japan is a better place to be queer than in the US, because of all the state, local bans and that are happening in the US, whereas Japan nationally seems to be trying to push the envelope. And just another little story that I told Larry, I don't know if this is interesting, but before, when folks weren't talking about trans and queer stuff, I would go to a women's bathroom and I would have no problem. They would think that I was a volleyball player. But then after after all those videos started coming out, like Asako Hanafsa with Asahi Shimbun, she started doing little shorts about transgender youth in Japan. And then after those videos came out, more public conversation. Now, when I go to into a women's bathroom in Japan, people are like, "Oh, what are you doing in here?" Like visibly kind of scared, and then giving me sort of Japanese stink eye. And I consider this a form of backlash. I just wondered if you had any thoughts about this. And, also maybe if you folks could also talk about what to tell young people who think it's terrible to be queer in America today. For both. Yeah, both. So you can go first, Akira.
Yeah, so unfortunately, especially after a passage of new law last year, the anti-transgender, especially transgender women, is rising in Japan. Like, it's so sad. And then because that, so even though a new law, like Soji Understanding Law, it doesn't have any articles to change the rule of gender segregated facilities, like including toilet or like, how do you say, public baths, like in Japanese, sento, like sento or onsen. But those religious groups, like conservative groups, and also the tough feminists, like they claim that if a man says that he's a woman, he can automatically go into those women's toilet or like women's center, like women's bathroom. But that's not true. But because still like not many people are educated about the about the contents of the new law and also the transgender people, like more, I feel that like more and more Japanese people are really believing that anti-transgender discourse, which is really unfortunate and really sad. So like we as a LGBTQ community really has to fight back, and then also by telling the truth and by telling the truth about the content of the new law, and also a new law is not related to the use of gender segregated facilities and so on. So yeah, so we really, I want to learn from the US, the case about anti-trans, how to counter anti-transgender discourse. Yeah.
I haven't lived in Japan now for a year and a half, so I caveat it with that, and I'm sure what you're saying is 100% a concern, but I would be hesitant to say that one is better than the other. I think we have the same issues in both countries with teenage suicides and the difficulties of bullying in schools. I have a little bit of experience myself, even at a very early age, as a gay parent of a second grader in a Japanese public school. But these issues are common, I think, to both countries, and I think we just need to keep plugging forward with awareness. The situation, I think, overall for the LG side of LGBT in Japan has just immeasurably improved over the 30 or 40 years that I've seen. I mean, I remember being thrown out of an apartment after we had a contract when I was working at a law firm because they didn't know on the contract that I had a male partner. I don't think it may happen. It may happen still. It may happen more likely in the transgender context, but I think the level of social awareness has improved dramatically in Japan, and I think the public opinion polls show it, and I think that creates a basis to make progress, though there's issues.
I was very naive in starting the work 24 years ago because I thought that if we could prevail on the military arguments and LGBT rights more broadly, we could dismantle the hatred machine in politics. And part of what I learned after we won on Don't Ask, Don't Tell was that there's a pretty flexible capacity of the hatred machine to turn to other targets. And so in no way did we disable the hatred machine. I mean, fascism needs enemies. Adam Serwer wrote a book called Cruelty is the Point, that from the fascist perspective, the point of government policy is to use that policy and power to injure scapegoats. In class this week, I taught an article about anti-trans advocates who admitted openly that when gays and lesbians and bisexuals, for better and worse, kind of prevailed in the politics of respectability, in other words, were no longer good scapegoats, they just threw a bunch of demonization spaghetti at the wall, trying to find different scapegoats and trying to find different attacks that worked. And they came up and based on polling and focus groups, like super sophisticated. And then they found, oh, like trans athletes in school and trans in the bathrooms, that's where we got to go. And then managed to get state legislatures all over the United States to introduce bills on that behalf. So I am very pessimistic about American democracy. You asked what I would tell young people. I think we're headed, I actually think democracy in many important senses is already over. I mean, we have millions of BIPOC people suppressed from, can't vote, like voter suppression. That's not democracy. And more and more and more, it's going to get worse and worse and worse. So to be honest, what I tell young people is if you have the privilege to do so, you need to fight or you need to move. Sorry.
That's okay. Okay. All right. Any questions from the audience? Yes. And then also, well, we have online questions as well, right? Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I'm very interested in what role employers play in Japan around promoting. Very brief history. I worked in Asia for 30 years in countries where there was no protection. As an employer, we put protections in place. We recognized same-sex partners. We brought those into the workplace. People came out. Are employers getting behind these changes, or is it just the fight for legislator?
Oh yeah, because I think I couldn't get your question. Sorry, but maybe you can go first.
Well, I think the question is about whether employers are doing what they should be doing to promote equality and non-discrimination in Japan. And that's been a fundamental concern of mine in the 10 years that I've been working in Japanese companies in particular. And I would say it's a work in progress. And I think an example of my own company, which I talked about earlier, Panasonic, and Lixil is also, one of the companies I think is a bit on the forefront. They have affinity groups. They could be stronger. Today in this conversation I had with the Salesforce Outforce folks, I learned a lot. I wish I knew that stuff when I was still at Panasonic. Could they be doing more? I think much more. And one of the issues is that diversity in Japan is not really understood, even among a lot of corporate leaders, as something that goes beyond promoting gender diversity. And that needs to be focused on, of course, but they don't recognize that for Japanese companies to become global, they've got to have support not just for LGBTQ+, but for people of different national origins, to protect minorities like ethnically Korean people in Japan, people with different skill sets, because they got to come from the outside of the company instead of just growing up from college in the same company all their lives. All of that stuff is part of diversity, which is what I tried to promote. So could they be doing more? A lot more. But I think a lot of companies are starting to do this sort of stuff.
Akira, do you want to add?
Yeah, actually, I totally agree with the Ray, because actually more and more Japanese, companies are trying to promote diversity and inclusion in terms of LGBTQ rights. But if you look at the small middle-sized companies, they still don't know how to do it. And then, so that's why we also, the LGBTQ community, also needs to communicate with those relatively smaller companies, and to talk more about the diversity and the inclusion. But so like Lily said, there's a lot to go, but yeah, so that's.
Great, and we have a question from
Keith from online. It's okay to turn on your video and camera and ask your question.
Hello, everyone. I'm here. First, can we hear? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Great. Thank you so much. Hi, Amy. It's good to see you. It's been a while.
Yeah.
Hi. And thank you so much to the panelists today and everybody involved. My question is for Nishiyama-san. Hajimemashite. My question is about the new law, the new law in 2023, increasing LGBTQ understanding. So one of the critiques about that law is that there aren't concrete next steps on how it's going to get codified into law across universities, schools, companies. Do you have an update on or any insights on what the country's next steps are in terms of how to actually get that like moving as a law? So much.
Okay. Thank you so much for your question. So actually, we still don't know because now, based on the law, so the government has to formulate a basic implementation plan and a guidance for operation. But as far as we know, we really don't know like when the government will formulate the basic implementation plan, and so. Yeah, the answer is we really don't know how this law applies to the work of company and school or local governments and so. But the former Minister Ogura-san, Minister Ogura, who is in charge of gender equality, and he said that during a meeting that was held by the liaison committee in the cabinet office, he said like a few months ago, he said that, okay, even if we still don't have a basic implementation plan, local governments, school, and company, please do like any kind of thing that promotes the diversity of surgery. So like, it's like, I don't know, maybe I think the government is trying to know more about what's happening in Japan and what kind of policies, surgery, LGBTQ policies have been implemented so far by each ministry and so on. So yeah, so that's my answer to you. Thank you.
Great. We have another question, IRL. Imani? Yeah, go ahead.
Thanks so much. I guess I was wondering, how do you think of, Aaron, you talked so much about strategy, and then I just heard, talking about diversity. And I guess I was wondering about, when you're thinking about strategies, are there ways that you look at combining seemingly different movements? So often, when we talk about fights around abortion, like that people say that is a fight against women. And obviously that's true. And also that affects more people. And it's a larger issue of bodily autonomy that obviously has implications for LGBTQ people, especially trans people. When we think about book bans, that in racial justice circles, there's talks about this leaving out stories about people of color, about people that have immigrated to this country. But we also know that that keeps LGBTQ people out of public life. And then later, if we look at that it's harder to see if we leave LGBTQ people and people of color out of public life, then later it's easier to dismiss our identities. And I guess I wonder, how do you think about combining movements and being a bit more intersectional as a strategic way of protecting LGBTQ people?
That's a great question. And I would actually be interested in your thoughts about that from your work at NCLR. From my point of view, one of the tragic and brilliant things about the way discriminatory power can work in this country is that it's pretty easy to play divide and conquer politics with various groups that should be marching in lockstep. I know that during the fights on behalf of gays, lesbians, and bisexuals in the military, we approached groups working on women in the military and race in the military, and it was too hard for them to work with us because they had made more progress than we had, and they said we were stones around their necks. And from a tactical point of view, I think they were right. Then there's a whole other lens to look at the question from. There were critiques of our work on trans military inclusion from the trans community, who made the point that, look, the military as a force of imperial power has done incredible violence to people of color, trans people, sexual minorities around the world. And so to fight on behalf of military inclusion is to leave our allies behind. And so from within the trans community, there were people, I actually agree with them, even though I continue to do the work, the critiques of our work, that we were abandoning intersectionality. And I think they were exactly right. My argument was we had to keep fighting the fight because we didn't want to give fascism a free pass in this lane. But undermining intersectionality is quite a price to pay.
I just wanted to say a word about that, if I could, in the specific context of the LGBT non-discrimination and equality issues in Japan. I just went over it quickly a moment ago, but I think Japan, a couple of points. Japan cares very much about what happens in the United States. That goes back, of course, to the post-war history. And of course, that's why I'm worried about what happens in the United States to a significant extent too. But that's one point. And I think we should leverage that. The second point is Japanese companies are struggling globally, and this is a corporate perspective, as compared to Korean and increasingly Chinese companies. And I think to become truly global, I think a lot of companies are realizing they need to broaden their diversity programs. And I think this is where you get almost into a Japanese notion of intersectionality, where you can, there's a lot of progress, at least on paper and in people's voices on gender equality. I think we should definitely tap into that. But I think this globalization issue, where you can convince companies, if you can convince them, and people in Japan, that for Japan's economy and for their companies to continue to be competitive, they're going to have to become global in all senses of the word, and that includes diversity. And by the way, as a lawyer, I always had to tell them, you better stay out of legal trouble in countries like the United States and Europe and Australia on these issues too, because that's a real risk. So I just add that thought to your interesting question.
Akira, can you add anything about the work with JL?
Yeah, so like in terms of intersectionality, like our organization and also the actors around our organization, like we are really aware of intersectionality, because what happened in LGBTQ community, I mean the problem or issues, might be like similar to the problems that are happening in other communities, like for instance, the foreign residents in Japan, or like how do you say, the Korean Japanese in Japan, they're like minority group and so on. So like as a not Japanese, as JO, like we have been working with the feminist organization or the other CSOs that is trying to advocate for rights of the other minority group in Japan. And for instance, and then they also want the anti-discrimination law too. And so as a group, as the member of how do you say, the civil society, like we sometimes, not sometimes, but we have held some symposium to talk about comprehensive anti-discrimination law and so on. So like from civil society side, we are trying to put more focus on intersectionality. But in generally speaking, the general, how do you say, general public, I'm afraid that not many people are still aware of intersectionality. So that's something that we should work on.
Hi, thank you. I just said we've heard about corporations and legislation related to visibility for LGBTQ plus people in Japan, and I'm curious about what the role of pop culture and media and the state of that is right now in furthering visibility for that community, and any ways that y'all work with those groups to create more space for queer people in media.
Akira, maybe you can go first.
Yeah, thank you, sir. I think the more and more like visibility of LGBTQ people in entertainment field, I think there are more and more LGBTQ people are showing up and showing their true identity. And because of that, like more and more younger generations, like 20s, they are more aware of diversity of SOGI, and also, yeah, because like in Japan, like let's say 10 years ago, we could see only gay people who dressed like women. So it's called one, like maybe Larissa, I know that word. So it's the one means it describes the man who dresses like a woman. So that's the only image that we could see as a sexual minority, like 10 years ago. But that now, like we see lesbian, gay, transgender, bisexual, non-binary, those people even in mass media, even though it's still a small portion, but I think that is affecting in a good way for people, Japanese people, to know more about the diversity of SOGI. But yeah.
Do you folks want to add anything? No?
Not sure, maybe it's generational, but I'm not sure I have anything useful to contribute to your good question.
We'll move on to the next question. Oh, you have to push the green button here.
Hello. The big question, you know, coming from, my mother's from Taiwan. So I know Taiwan was one of the first countries that came out openly, right? So that was a pretty big feat. For me, it's, I know even being born in Florida, culturally, it was extremely hard to come out like a Southern Asian. So my thing is, you know, some of the struggles I see is also deeply cultural. And, you know, I have a friend that lives in Tokyo. We met in Florida. She's straight, works for Walt Disney World and Human Resources Department. And, you know, we've had conversations, and it's, it just seems that this is more than just being out. This is a really deeply rooted cultural barriers that's within the culture in itself. And so, you know, I'm hearing about the corporate world, and, you know, these, the leaders that be, you know, it also depends on what generation we're talking about at IHC. I think this is much more than taking a stance. I think this is also taking a stance on cultural, because I know that for myself, that it's almost like going against what I'm taught at home culturally, you know, immigrant. You know, my mother's adjusting, it's taken a couple decades. But, you know, it takes something to stand true, and it takes a lot of beating, you know, a lot of resilience to continue to remain authentic. So that's why I'm also seeing, you know, I think it's amazing, the Asian culture. I mean, it makes me feel really proud, right? But at the same time, it's just more a dialogue to say, hey, are we really also talking about maybe a deeper level, you know, where are they afraid, like any other family is, I mean, I think different generations are gonna have a different experience, like millennials, it's like normal, right? I've spoken to all age groups. I do a lot of advocacy here in San Francisco, GLAD, NCLR, HRC, for a couple decades. And so my observations is, you know, about the story and the narrative. And I think it goes all together with politics, which I'm not really a fan of politics, but truth speaking, right? So I just wanted to hear your take on, you know, I have a fusion of East and West, and it's been a, you know, I'm 54, but it's taken some time to bring kind of that marriage together, where I embrace my American side and my Asian side. And then you got the gay thing, and you got that, and you got this. So it's taken a while to kind of like, okay, I got it now. But I just what I'm trying to say, like, you know, even companies are like sticking their neck out. I mean, I have a you know, white tiger on a conversion, and I'm an open company, and I know I'm a small company right now, but taking it more organically out and open, eventually nationwide. But it really is taking something to be in that stand, you know? So that's why I just wanted to really talk to you that even as a personal person, you know, taking that leap into a more male dominated arena, on top of that being Asian, on top of that being female, on top of that being, you know, my own image. You know, I just wanted to see if you could speak to that, because I think it's just, there's so many more dynamics. And how do we kind of wrap that all in one?
Akira, do you want to say something? Okay, let me think. Okay.
It's a lot there. I'm very touched by the comments, actually, because I don't think there's any one analysis or perspective that changes some of these fundamental issues that we're talking about. We all here come from 3 different backgrounds, and I think these issues, to the extent there's been progress, have been multidimensional and attacking them in many different ways. And culture is hugely a part of it. I mean, one reason I'm a little bit more optimistic maybe than Aaron is that I grew up in the 70s when there was Anita Bryant, right? And you know, I was taught in the environment and place I grew up in that, you know, this was sinful. I had a whole bunch of things to get over, which I didn't get over until actually I went to Asia and learned a lot more about myself and other cultures. And, you know, I don't want to say that it was an escape from what it was here, but I think it enabled me to look beyond the environment that I grew up in. And those cultural issues are so strong. So I guess I do have a little bit more optimism that we'll get through this too. And I hope we do. But one thing that hasn't come up today, which I'd love Akira's thoughts about, if she has, I'm sure she's thought about it, is this family registration system in Japan. I've forgotten the Japanese for it.
Koseki.
Yeah, like koseki, right? And this is a very rigid system that affects a lot of things in society. So I'm always hesitant to like say there's culture, it's either culture or it's legal or it's economic, because it's usually a combination of these things. But women still can't keep their own names legally, right? And that goes back fundamentally to the system. And I had this issue when I was trying to register my children and get them a proper permanent residence, because they were my husband's legal children, even though I had adopted them in the United States. And Japan should recognize I mean, there were all these family law issues that we haven't even touched on today. And so I totally understand your point. You've lived it in a particularly challenging way, but it's a combination of factors that have to be attacked, I think. I don't want to put you on the spot, but
So any other comments? You can pass. You don't, no pressure for the other, because we have other questions. Should we move on to the next questions? And then, oh, do you? But we'll talk after. Yeah, yeah. Okay, sorry. I have some referrals I can give you. Yeah, we'll chat later. Okay, Jennifer? Okay, cool. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm Nancy Yamaguchi. I'm a board member of the Japan Society of Northern California, and I'm just so proud that we're putting on this event, and we need to do more of this, Steve and Larry and Miho. But my question is kind of building on Aaron's pessimism towards US politics, because, you know, the right wing is just so out of control, and, you know, this is not the America and the diverse society that I signed up for. And it just hurts me to no end to see them bashing not only LGBTQ community, but, you know, our transgender youth. The vitriol, the poison is just getting worse and worse and worse. And I share your pessimism. But when I think about Japan and whenever I'm in Japan, the right wingers there, I just feel like it's just a different brand. It's a different breed, it's like the Uyoku is, they're all into the emperor, but and then when you look at the Japanese politics, I mean, here at least I feel like there's an alternative, right? There's the right wingers, but be on the left, we're just as strong and we're fighting back. And I agree with you, Aaron. We have to fight. This is an era where we cannot be complacent. We have to fight. But on the Japan side, it's a one-party system, right? Just the Jiminto LDP. That's it. And so what do you think about the two of you who have lived in Japan for so long, and Akira being politically active, and Larry, you were absorbing all of this as a corporate leader. What do you think about the LDP, and what are they doing to support LGBTQ rights, and what do you think about their approach towards transgender kids and youth? And I mean, how could we, I mean, the next generation is so important to change, and I am very passionate about that. And I just wonder what the politicians in Japan are doing under a one-party system. It's almost like fascism.
So I realize that we're running over. I'm sorry, Larry. What kind of flexibility do you have? I can have actually all the questions posed, and then folks can ask. Okay. Okay. So there's one person here. So just ask your question, and then you can ask your question, and then you can ask your question, and
I
then.
have some online questions as well.
Oh, you have. Oh, no. Okay. Oh, just one question. Oh, one from online. Okay, but do you not want to just to hear the question, and then we can, okay, all right. Okay, so we're going to do a express round of questions. Okay, go, Chris.
Sorry. First of all, thank you. I am actually very inspired by all three of your ways of fighting the strategies. It's been amazing. So I would like to offer, in the US history, we've actually defended and pushed boundaries around fighting on the grassroots level, on the street level, whether it's like Stonewall, whether it's domestic violence. People have come together and said, we can't stand this, and we're going to stand and support these people. And then that was lifted up. And then through donations, for instance, from businesses, from government, they have been able to turn those into nonprofits to be able to start changing legislation. And I think that's been a history that is missing in this, to talk about the way that rights have been established through the grassroots up. I was wondering, your CSOs, are they supported in the same way? Are they funded to be able to lift that up and to be able to come from the grassroots up?
So maybe during the reception, you can answer the question. We're going to hear more questions here. Yeah. Your mic's not on.
Hi, my question is about families. I'm a mother of a gay child as well as a trans child. And I'm wondering, when you mentioned that 88% or whatever percent of young adults do support gay rights and are more positive and active, I'm wondering how parents are communicated to, how are parents brought in as allies, and then also what kind of support is there in Japan for parents who may not be familiar with the issues that their children face.
Hi, I'm Sparks with the Masto Foundation. So we fund in Japan. Hi, it's good to see you. And this information might have already been presented, but it relates directly to how can we get money there? Which I'm in philanthropy, so that's what I think about. But I think, unless I'm wrong, in East Asia, even LGBTQ funding last year, based on the Global Philanthropy Resource Report, was about $28 million, of which Japan, actually, there was only about $450,000 US that went to all LGBTQ issues in the country of Japan. And so that provides a lot of opportunity. I hear that, and I hear there's a ton of opportunity for companies or individuals, crowdfunding, to send money to y'all, which you can do a lot with very little funds. And so I guess my question would be folks who are thinking about how can we help get resources over there? That's something I'd like to talk to folks about.
Okay, great. Go to Sparks for Money, folks. We have 2 online questions. We were gonna ask them. Okay, we're gonna, that's gonna be a reception question, yeah.
If we
So
don't have
let's,
time now, again.
let's
in
do the
person,
online, yeah.
We'll be able to do it at the networking reception, but
Okay.
yeah, right.
Oh, just one
Okay.
question?
We're doing 2, Miho.
Okay.
Okay, so the first one is from Tokugo Hirano. If you want to turn on your camera and video, please go ahead and do so. Hirano. Yeah, they might not be here. So we also have one from Salesforce Japan. They've joined today and they seem like they have a question they want to ask. So if Salesforce Japan, if you're still there, can you turn on your camera and audio? Maybe they're not there anymore. Oh, okay. Oh, they are. Oh, Salesforce Japan, welcome. Oh, you're muted. You're muted. You're muted. Kiko and I, you're muted.
Hey, this is Outforce Japan coming to you live from Salesforce Tower, Tokyo. Sorry about howling. Thank you so much for this inspirational session. I think we have a long way to go, but just how far we've come is just testament to your resilience and just your pure activism. Thank you so much. My question is about, well, at Outforce Japan, we do a lot in LGBTQ plus advocacy, but we still struggle to get the general employee community interested. And I think the general public in Japan are known to be relatively apolitical and not sufficiently informed about social issues and minority struggles. Do you have any advice as to how to activate public interest? Thank you.
More the general public. So actually, I don't know like clear answer for you yet, but let me think. Let me think, and then I get back to you later. Sorry, or maybe I can message you later because I think we are connected on Facebook or something.
Larry, you have some thoughts?
Well, it's the question, right? That is so difficult. And, you know, it is a bit circular and chicken and egg like, and it goes to your point as well. And, you know, it's not just, I can say only 10% of people come out, right? And if just a fraction more of those 90% were to come out, you're going to increase exponential awareness in families, in workplaces, and that will itself promote change and public support. This goes to the political question too, because is the politics really going to change if there's not fundamentally that demand of people expressing a need for their own rights and for those that they love and respect, their friends around them? If they're not out there fighting for that, you know, the political change is going to be slow. So I don't really have too much more to say about it, but I think this is really important. The money question and getting people who are communicators, hiring a public relations firm, if we could do it, to really get stuff out there in the media more than it is. It's a great point.
Are these our last remarks? Yeah. So in addition to thanking everyone, I really want to hear more from the questioners. I want to hear more about the cultural barriers that you were talking about, Jennifer. And I learned a lot from this, but I do want to make a plug for funding your organization, which is, one thing we have on our side, aside from the facts and that we're right on the merits, is that the other side doesn't gain anything by winning. We have motive and we have truth on our side, and these victories are incredibly inexpensive. Don't Ask, Don't Tell repeal over 20 years cost the philanthropy to all the organizations $30 million bucks. Compared to what folks on the other side spend on hatred, it's nothing. The repeal of the transgender ban was $3 million bucks. So with a tiny amount of money, it's really possible to make a lot of progress. So I hope that the funds, go in your direction.
I just want to thank all of you for coming. We have Larry Greenwood to give closing comments.
We have Steve Pollack to give closing comments. Steve Pollack is the president of the Japan Society of Northern California. Sorry, Amy.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody. And actually, before I wrap us up, I wanted to give just a moment to Andy Wailagala, who is our grantor and sponsor of this event. We mentioned earlier that the National Association of Japan America Societies, along with funding from the Embassy of Japan, had sponsored this event. So I want to thank him and give him a chance to just tell us a little bit about what he does and this program.
Thank you very much, Steve. Thank you, everybody. I wanted to, thank and congratulate you, Steve, Miho, Larry, and the entire team at Japan Society Northern California for getting a Japan Currents grant and then putting on such a wonderful program here today. Again, repeat the thanks to Margaret Taylor and the wonderful folks at Salesforce for giving a backdrop, this exceptional location for an exceptional talk. If I could, just a couple of words then about this organization, an association of associations, which you got a ton of in Washington, D.C., where I'm based. Not quite as well known as this fine society. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of background real quick on what it is we do. It has to be quick. I've only been with the group for 365 days as of today. I joined coming back from overseas to do that. So my anniversary today. What I wanted to mention is that we have this, we like to think of ourselves as the umbrella for 38 different Japan American societies from Honolulu to Boston. Pretty exceptional. There's no other binational relationship that I know of that has a network with that kind of reach and scale, 11,000 members, 9,000 individuals. So we call ourselves the umbrella, providing coverage to that whole network. We're really much more, I've learned, especially coming here, of a sponge than an umbrella, because the learning is often from here. This society is so dynamic that its impact is felt all around, whether it's the programs that you guys do in health tech, in next gen, the programming you do back in Japan, discussions like today, just using technology in the way you have with this great hybrid interactivity is absolutely fabulous. But whether we're a sponge or an umbrella, we're still keeping folks dry. That's a good thing. And so how do we do that? Our stock in trade is programming. So we partner with folks like the Embassy of Japan, as mentioned. They're the real senior partner in this, who help facilitate this. But we work with other institutional partners on series of talks, basically, in a whole bunch of verticals. So this is a series known as Japan Currents, which is public affairs. There's going to be 9 of these talks around the country through our network this year. There's another one where we partner with the Sasakawa Peace Foundation, looks at geostrategy at the grassroots level, right? Push out of the capitals and have really interesting discussions about security issues. We have a military to military program called JUMP. They just had a program in Seattle the other day. A business speaker series will be coming to Denver and Austin. And of course, with Larry's alma mater, ACCJ, we also get in touch and do programming with American companies who are making a big impact in Japan. So that's essentially what we do. We also have some other roles. We host an annual meeting, which brings the 38 together. We'll be in Portland, Oregon in August. with a number. We'll have, I'm sure, Steve, Larry, Miho, others joining. It's a really big year, as you folks know, for U.S.-Japan relations. We've got the 80th anniversary of the cessation of hostilities. This happens to be the U.S.-Japan year of tourism. We've got the Prime Minister coming. There's just an awful lot happening. So please keep an eye on this society, on the umbrella sponge of NAJAS, and please stay engaged on great topics and discussions like today's. Thanks very much. Good seeing you.
Thanks, Andy. So I know everybody wants to get to the refreshments and enjoy that, but before we close, I do want to mention just make a couple of announcements about Japan Society programming. As you've heard, we do a lot of different programming. We have more coming up soon. In fact, I had to make a list because I wasn't sure I would be able to remember them all. We have an event on March 4th called Building a Sustainable Future, which is looking at open innovation between California and Japan in the area of climate tech. So that's an event coming up on the 4th. On the 6th, Morgan Lewis is hosting an event on AI innovation, which will look at approaches in the EU, the US, and Japan on regulating AI, which is a topic that I think affects all of us in many different ways. And on the 13th, we have something called Next Gen Japan, which is building relationships and activity among younger generation folks interested in Japan that will take place on the peninsula. That is also supported by the Japanese consulate. And speaking of the Japanese consulate, I wanted to mention, especially for this group, that on March 4th, there's another event called Technological Innovations for LGBTQ plus Inclusion, which will take place on the 4th. You can see an announcement of the event up on the screen. This is by the Japanese consulate that's putting that on. And so I hope that you will find this opportunity and take advantage of other things that we have coming up. As Larry mentioned at the start, we have almost a program a week, and hopefully you'll be able to enjoy that. So without any further delay, let me thank Salesforce for hosting our event today. Let me thank Andy, NAJAS, and the Embassy of Japan for funding this event today. And let me give a huge thank you to our speakers and our moderator for joining us today for a fantastic discussion. I think we all came away feeling like we learned a lot and had a very good conversation on some topics that we all need to focus on going forward, and really appreciate your attention and involvement. So thank you everybody for coming and enjoying the program today.
Building bridges between the United States and Japan since 1905. Japan Society.